let me offer a prayer before we begin. Dear God, please be with us as we hear your message. Let these words that I speak be your words. Lord, let us take them into our heart. We love you, Jesus, and it's in your holy name we come. Amen. Okay, have any of you ever set up a series of dominoes so that when you knock down the first one, they all fall in succession? Have you ever done that? It's kind of fun, isn't it? It's not always easy to get them to set up right, but it sure is fun to watch them fall. So just for fun this morning, I want to share a video with you. This is called Rainbow Dominoes. So let's watch as these dominoes fall. Gotta tell you, I had a lot of fun watching videos to find the right one. I think I spent about 3 hours doing that. I don't know about you, there's something really satisfying to me about not only watching these, but listening to the sound of them falling. I don't know what that is, but I love that. That just intrigues me. But you know, building domino setups is really a huge, big deal. There are local, there are national competitions. There's even an international competition called Domino Day. And it takes place every year in the Netherlands. And during this event, builders try to outdo each other by these huge setups. And the winner usually is the one that has the most dominoes. So the current Domino Day record was set on November 13th, 2009. There were a group of 89 builders who set up and toppled, listen to this, 4,491,863 dominoes. Can you imagine setting that many up? That just blows my mind. Now, it goes without saying, I think that there are many domino fails as well. You know, thinking about setting up a group of them and you know, without knocking into one or misplacing one and causing a chain reaction. It happens a lot, right? But there's one Domino Day epic fail that's still talked about today, and it wasn't caused by human error. Here's what happened. Back in October of 2005, volunteers from over 100 countries gathered together in the Netherlands in preparation of Domino Day. It took them 1 month to set up their creation, and it had 4,321,000 dominoes. Everything appeared to be perfectly arranged, and so that the group was in line not only to win Domino Day, the prize, but they were also in line to win the new Guinness Book of World Record for the most dominoes set up. So just before the competition started, though, a little sparrow flew in through one of the open windows in the competition hall and knocked into one of their dominoes. Well, you know it caused a chain reaction, right? 23,000 dominoes fell. Now, fortunately, the team still had enough dominoes standing to actually win not only the Domino Day prize, but they also won the Guinness Book of World Record prize that year. Now, you might wonder why only 23,000 dominoes fell, because obviously if they were set up correctly, they should have all fallen, right? But there's a good reason they didn't fall. The builders had been concerned about anything, any accident happening that would cause everything to fall prematurely. So they installed 750 safeguards in their design to limit any type of accident. And these safeguards were referred to as rests. And they were intentionally put in place to stop every piece from falling. And without those rests being in place, the group would have lost everything. All because of this little bird who accidentally flew into the building. Now you might wonder what that has to do with our sermon for today, right? But believe it or not, I think there is a connection. And I want to read part of Exodus 31 to you again. This is the 4th commandment. It goes like this. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbath. There will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so that you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Observe the Sabbath because it is holy to you. For 6 days work is to be done, but the 7th day is a day of Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. The Israelites are to observe the Sabbath, celebrating it for the generations to come as a lasting covenant. It will be a sign between me and the Israelites forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. Now think about this for a moment. In the story I shared with you about the domino competition that was almost destroyed by a bird, the builders had anticipated that something would happen, so they built a series of safeguards into their setup. And again, they referred to these safeguards as rests. And those rests ensured that all of their hard work wasn't destroyed in an instant. And I think in the same way, God gave the Israelites this commandment to observe a day of rest, a Sabbath, so that they wouldn't exhaust themselves and become worthless. In other words, the rest that God commanded them to take served as a safeguard in order to keep the Israelites healthy, strong, and able to continue on their journey to the Promised Land. Now you should know, taking a Sabbath wasn't something new as far as God was concerned. We hear these words in Genesis 2, which is part of the creation story, because by the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. You see, God knew how important it was for the Israelites to rest, because he himself had rested after creating the world. Now, I think it's interesting that up until the time when the Israelites reached Mount Sinai, there was no mention of God actually telling them to take a Sabbath day to rest, although there was some indication that God expected them to. And if you remember in Exodus 16, we're told that the Israelites complained about not having enough food to eat. So God sent them manna. It was a type of grain, and telling them that every morning they were to collect only enough for that particular day. But he also told them that on the sixth day, they were to collect enough manna for 2 days, and that they were to prepare it ahead of time so that all they had to do on the seventh day was to eat it. They didn't have to do any work to prepare it. So it seems to indicate that God did intend for people to rest on the Sabbath or the seventh day. But here for the first time, in this fourth commandment, we specifically hear that God wanted them to rest on the seventh day, and that they were to consider it as something holy, something to be honored and enjoyed. And so as time went on, for the most part, the Israelites honored God's command to keep the Sabbath. They counted their days a bit differently than we do, so they understood that a new day began at sundown, and it lasted until sundown of the next day. So the Sabbath for them began on what we would consider to be Friday evening, and it would end on what we would consider to be Saturday evening. And if you remember, Jesus was crucified on what we call a Friday. And his body had to be taken down. Technically, for them, it would have been Thursday. But his body had to be taken down before sundown, had to be taken off the cross, because otherwise they weren't allowed to do any work. That's when the Sabbath began. That's why his body wasn't properly anointed before he was buried. That's why the women couldn't do anything to help him until early, what we consider Sunday morning, as soon as the Sabbath ended. But again, for the most part, the Israelites, who were later called Jewish, continued to observe these Sabbath requirements that God had originally laid out for them. The problem was, over the years, these religious leaders began to add more and more rules that they were expected to follow on the Sabbath. And it became very much of a burden rather than a joy. By the time Jesus was born, the religious leaders had made 234 rules that applied to what people could and could not do on the Sabbath. And they were organized into 39 specific categories. For instance, there's a category of tying, all about tying, T-Y-I-N-G. It said people were forbidden to tie knots on the Sabbath, except for ones that could be loosened by one hand. They could tie their shoes if they had to as well. There's a category called, Conda's laughing, it's like, I was reading these things. There's a category called writing, W-R-I-T-I-N-G. The rule said a person could not carry enough ink to make 2 letters. You could carry enough for 1 letter, but not 2. And you could not erase or destroy any type of writing on the Sabbath. There's a category called carrying. No one was allowed to carry anything in the streets. If you walked down the street on the Sabbath, you weren't allowed to carry anything. If you had a baby, I don't know what you did. Couldn't carry anything. They were allowed to carry things in their own homes, though. These are fascinating to read. I could go on and on. But these rules and these regulations became so ridiculous that when Jesus and his disciples walked through a wheat field on a Sabbath, the religious leaders complained because a couple of the disciples picked heads of grain off the stalk. They weren't allowed to do that. You also might remember that Jesus was criticized for healing a man on the Sabbath. That's when they began to think maybe we should put this man to death. So they considered those things to be work. And Jesus wasn't happy about hearing how these religious leaders complained about it. So he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And what he meant by that was that God had made the Sabbath so that people can rest from all the work they had to do on the other days of the week. God intended the Sabbath to be a blessing, not a burden. So it wasn't necessary for these Israelites and the Jewish people to add a lot of rules to his command to observe the Sabbath. Of course, they did it anyway, right? Now, even though this commandment was made for the Israelites all those years ago, I really think it still applies to us today. When you stop and think about it, you'll see that all God is asking us here to do is to take a break from our regular work every week and rest and refresh ourselves. And it's absolutely necessary for us to spend time in resting if we're going to accomplish all that God has called us to do. Now, I'm old enough that I remember when I was little, there was nothing open on Sundays, right? I remember the drugstore was open. I remember asking my mom why it was open. She said some people might need to get medicine. I remember gas stations were open only for gas, because you might need gas if you were traveling or something. But I clearly remember that every other store was closed for the most part. Every type of business was closed as well. There were no sports games, there were no sports practices on Sunday like there are now. And so because we couldn't go shopping, because we couldn't go to the mall, because we couldn't really even go out to eat for the most part, families spent time going to church together. And afterwards they shared a meal and they enjoyed being together the rest of the day. There wasn't anything else to do, right? So that's what everyone did. And it was good for families to spend that time together. I think they bonded, they became closer. Closer perhaps than many families are today, because we don't always set aside time to be together anymore. And I'm not sure when Sunday stopped being a day of rest and became a day to run from one activity to another. I'm not sure when that happened. But it makes sense that it's not good for us to behave that way when Monday morning rolls around and we find ourselves too exhausted to get up and go to work. When we fail to take time to rest, when we find ourselves so busy that we can't even think, we become exhausted, we become worn out, and then we wonder why we're so unhappy. You know, not taking time off to rest is not only harmful, but I think it can be deadly as well. Did you know that the worst industrial accidents in recent years, the Exxon Valdez, the 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, those things all occurred in the middle of the night when people were tired out and they weren't thinking clearly. We've all heard stories of doctors and nurses and firefighters and police officers who have worked so many hours that they're absolutely exhausted, so their judgment in caring for others is impaired. We certainly heard stories of fatal accidents where someone was so tired that he or she fell asleep at the wheel. Folks, God knows we get tired. So he made it very clear that we are to take time off to rest. And he himself rested after creating the world. He expects us to rest as well. I know it's not easy to take a day off when things are, so many things in the world are calling to us. But I encourage you to think about the things that you're committing yourself to. Think about the things you're committing your children to. And ask yourself if all of those things are more important than spending time worshiping God and being with your family, sharing a meal, talking, resting, playing games, taking a nap perhaps. I think if we're all honest, I think we all need a break sometimes to refresh and renew ourselves. God commanded us to do that. And so I encourage you to make it a weekly practice. Now next week we're going to look at the third commandment, which is, you shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. This ought to be interesting. But for now, let me close with a prayer. God, we're so grateful for your words. You teach us so many things, Lord, that perhaps we need to hear over and over and over again. It's always so hard to say no to things. And there's so many things we want to do, Lord, but Lord, you teach us that we need to stop for a moment and rest. So I pray that you will put that on all of our hearts this week. Just stop sometimes and rest. We love you, Jesus. It's in your holy name we come.